And up next is a presentation on Montana tunnels from Wayne Jepson. Wayne is a mining environmental scientist in the hard rock mining section of the Montana DEQ and formerly with the Department of State Lands, where he worked as a hydrogeologist in the hard rock mine permitting program since late 1981. In addition to reviewing new mining proposals and overseeing compliance at existing mines, Wayne has served as DEQ's project manager for reclamation and water treatment at the Zorman and Landusky sites since the bankruptcy of the operator in 1989. He's been involved in the oversight of Montana tunnels since the mid-1990s. Wayne holds a BA in Earth Science from Dartmouth College and an MS in Geology from the University of Montana. Please join me in welcoming Wayne.
Good afternoon. I guess as a disclaimer, first of all, I was only peripherally involved in oversight of this project until just a few years ago. So most of what I'm presenting, I learned from reading our files in the past month or so. And secondly, since I'm neither an attorney nor a promoter, do not base your decision to invest in or not invest in this project based on what I say. Okay, so the Montana Tunnels mine is located approximately halfway between here and Helena, just upstream of Jefferson City. It was initially proposed, it's in a historic mining district. This mine was initially proposed in 1984 by Centennial Minerals Incorporated. The state did an EIS, published a draft in 1985, and then adopted the draft as a final EIS in January 1986. Permit was issued in February 1986, and shortly after Centennial received the permit, the Pegasus Gold Corporation acquired Centennial Minerals as one of their subsidiaries, and they changed the name to Montana Tunnels Mining, Inc. a couple of years later to be consistent with the naming convention of all their other subsidiaries. And then through the rest of the 1980s, they basically operated under that initial permit with a few minor revisions to change locations of haul roads, etc. Here's an image of the mine pit and the tailings impoundment in the early days. According to the original plan, the project would last for 12 to 13 years, including about 10 years of actual mining at 10,000 tons of ore production per day. Estimated ore reserves of about 52 million tons, producing gold, zinc, lead, and silver. Initially expecting about 1,000-acre disturbance area. Large open pit, tailings impoundment, waste rock dumps. Tailings impoundment was initially partially lined with clay, and later on they didn't add any more liner or extend the under drains or anything like that. They just allowed the tailings to, rise up the hillside in essence. Let's see. So the EIS said, in terms of geotechnical stability, based on the rock types, they would expect localized pit slope failures, pit bench failures, and after closure of the mine, the rock would slowly erode and form erode away the pit benches over time. They anticipated the pit lake would take 480 years to reach equilibrium, meaning to fill up to a level where groundwater inflow equals groundwater outflow. And they predicted the pit would be acidic with like iron, manganese, and zinc in the couple milligrams per liter range, and lower concentrations of cadmium, copper, and lead. They basically said, geochemistry is too hard to predict, but it'll probably be not so good. In terms of the geology then, the ore deposit's hosted within a diatreme breccia, and that's intruded into Cretaceous and tertiary volcanic rocks. And the EIS noted that the mineralized zone is very soft rock, but that the pit walls would probably stand up because they'd be cut into more resistant rocks surrounding the ore deposit. But realistically, it's not a perfect geometry shaped like the pit, so there are zones of substantial structural weakness in the pit walls. And as you can see from this drawing, the ore mineralization extends quite deep beneath the existing pit. I think this sketch is based on like mid-2000s from the last EIS. So, in the first half of the 1990s, then they went through a few amendments to increase the size of the tailings impoundment, make it steeper, switch to upstream construction to expand their capacity. They redesigned other stuff. They came up with a waste rock segregation plan so that all the higher sulfide waste rock would go to the core of the waste dump, and the non-acid generating rock would be placed around the perimeters of the waste rock dumps. Over those several amendments, the state increased their bond from an initial $1.5 million up to $10.5 million by mid-1995. In 1996, they were authorized to add an additional mill circuit which would process off-site ore brought in from an underground mine that Pegasus had just gotten permitted out by Townsend. This is an aerial photo I took in 1996. And the two red arrows note a large slope failure here in the south pit high wall and some raveling occurring over in this area in the southwest, and this area over here is looking into the Clancy Creek drainage to the west of the mine. This picture again shows the south wall failure in 1996. And an inspection report I read from that time notes that they were frequently cleaning this haul ramp of debris that was falling down from this ongoing pit wall failure. And over on the other wall, there's a lot of rubble coming down from that area in the Clancy Creek area. And they noted in their report that they were observing seepage coming in through the pit wall beneath Clancy Creek. Let's see. Jumping ahead another year or so, in about September 1997, this large section of the pit wall here failed, blocking the pit haul ramp for some time. So they recognized some further mitigation was necessary to stable that high wall. Here you can see a cloud of dust from a rock fall coming down the pit wall. It's viewed from inside the pit in 1998. And here there's a haul road being constructed down into the edge of the Clancy Creek area to begin pit wall stabilization in that area. Let's see. Oops. So they submitted a permit revision in 1997, late 1997, to the state, or Pegasus proposed to mine an additional 40 million tons of waste rock out of the east high wall, which is where the pit ramp came down from the mill and down into the pit to access the pit floor where they're mining. And they'd recover a little bit more ore from that process. And that large volume of waste rock they're anticipating to move, they would place in front of the tailings dam to further buttress that, because it was a pretty steep dam, and with the upstream construction design was relatively high risk. The state's first comments on that proposal were, yeah, in addition, you should also propose a contingency plan to divert Clancy Creek further to the west in case there's a failure on that side of the pit that compromises the creek. After a couple of reviews, the state and the DEQ and the Bureau of Land Management agreed they could postpone that final channel design for about a year or so. But the rest of that plan was approved, but the company didn't act on it until about 5 years later. They did start work on Clancy Creek, however, as I mentioned, and What they did is they excavated all the alluvium out of the Clancy Creek Valley adjacent to the pit wall, excavated down to competent bedrock, and then began laying the pit wall from there down to the haul ramp back at a lesser angle to minimize the failures that were happening in the pit wall. And then ultimately they built a compacted, what they called an impermeable buttress between the creek's alluvium and the pit wall to keep water from flowing in from the Clancy Creek alluvium into the pit using diatreme waste material. And as they benched down in the pit wall, they drilled multiple horizontal dewatering holes to pull groundwater out of the bedrock to reduce their stability problems. And then they also put in pump back wells on the Clancy Creek side of things to dewater the alluvium adjacent to the buttress to further minimize risk of further failure. And speaking of further failure, Pegasus Gold declared bankruptcy in January 1998, i.e. just like a couple of months after we received that last proposal to, excavate 40 million tons of waste rock to stabilize the wall. Well, probably that didn't happen for 5 years because there was no money. I also noted that DEQ sent them a preliminary bond recalculation in September 1997. And usually what happens with a bond recalculation is there's months of back and forth between the state and the company about what the actual bond should be. In this case, they posted the full surety bond like the next day. So that's probably an indication they knew bankruptcy was right around the corner and they wanted to get the new bond in place before anyone else knew that bankruptcy was right around the corner. So ultimately, the bankruptcy process took about a year, after which, in the blue there is a list of all Pegasus Gold and all of its subsidiary corporations, which all declared bankruptcy at the same time. Ultimately, Montana Tunnels, Diamond Hill Mining Inc. out of Townsend, and Florida Canyon in Nevada emerged from bankruptcy as a new corporation that was created during the bankruptcy process called Apollo Gold, which was meant to operate their remaining viable companies. Apollo Gold never had that much capitalization though, so there was an agreement that if they completed certain projects, their bond would be reduced. It's part of the surety negotiations that these insurance companies had to pay for the reclamation bond that was posted at all of Pegasus' sites because they all went under, and one of the concessions was if they did a little bit of work, we'd reduce the bond somewhat. And then Montana Tunnels subsequently typically posted cash bonds when they needed a small expansion or something because no surety would give them more money. Here's a couple of pictures from, I think I jumped over one. I think, maybe not. Whoops. Nope. Yes, okay. All right, so here we can see in 2000 at the red arrow here, you can see a drill rig, and they're establishing a new haul ramp coming around this way. And a few months later, you can see that haul ramp is extended around, and they're now mining the haul ramp that you could see up here. They're taking out the ore underneath that and benching down here on the south wall to remove some extra ore they could access at that point. And then a couple of years later, the black and white photo shows a massive slope failure in the south wall of the pit, which I believe shut the mine down for a while. That was July 2002, the failure occurred. So this is when they finally started removing a larger volume of waste rock around the top of the pit and beginning to buttress the tailings impoundment. Here's a photo from late 2004. You can see they're now mining out that landslide in the south wall and working their way back down to the pit bottom again. And you can see in the upper photo here, the old tailings dam prior to this, which had this mosaic pattern of soil and bare rock on it because it was really too steep to hold soil very well. And then ultimately, with this new layback to stabilize the pit wall, they placed many millions of tons of waste rock out here in front of the dam, filled in one and a half of the two seepage collection ponds that were below the tailings dam to accommodate the buttress. And then, meanwhile, at about that time, the company was investigating the option of going underground to continue, rather than laying back the pit walls further, to stabilize. They were planning to just develop an underground mining plan, but the cost of the new infrastructure for going underground was probably prohibitive at this point, and especially with the company finances such as they were. So by June 2004, they submitted this Amendment 8, which was a pretty significant mine expansion, expanding the pit, deepening the pit, mining another 28 million tons of ore. By this time, they'd already been permitted to mine about 102 million tons of ore. And you can see in these two drawings, the previously permitted pit, which didn't cross Clancy Creek. The new design was to mine through the creek and to build a new creek channel through the pit high wall. So then in 2005, shortly after they submitted this mine expansion plan, they were having more stability problems. Here in the east wall, you can see the pit ramp coming down through here, and you can see dust rising because there's lots of rockfall going on. So October 2005, they suspended mining. They continued milling some low-grade ore stockpiles until they ran out. Finally, Elkhorn Goldfields basically acquired 50% ownership of Montana Tunnels by investing what I think turned out to be ultimately $14 million to build a new haul ramp to the pit bottom to access the ore. Elkhorn had acquired Newmont's properties up in the Elkhorn Township area in 1998, and they were developing an underground mining plan, which was, their plan was to truck all their ore to Montana Tunnels for milling, so their mine plan depended on Montana Tunnels being functional, so they invested a lot of money into it to keep the operation going. And then here you see, finally the new haul ramp is complete, and they're back in the pit bottom mining again. So the EIS was started in 2005, and then the company quit funding preparation of an EIS when the mine shut down, and so a long period went by without any work on the EIS. Finally, they got new funding again, completed the EIS. Record decision was issued October 2008. The EIS analysis did a more thorough geochemical model and now predicted that the pit lake would be alkaline and essentially meet all water quality standards. Here's the final mining phase. Again, picture the haul ramp. There you can see the pit bottom. In this picture, you can see the Clancy Creek flowing up here above the pit wall. This less steep area of the pit wall here is where they'd done that layback and installed dewatering wells to try to stabilize the pit. And again, December 2008, the mine ceased operation. They were down at the bottom of the pit. They did not have financing to begin stripping for the next phase, so they shut down. 2009, they were starting some preliminary work on wetlands mitigation for the mine expansion. October 2009, we permitted them to build a line diversion channel for Clancy Creek because they had seen some tension cracks, which you can see an inspector standing by some of them here. In the Clancy Creek Valley, they were worried that the creek would disappear into the ground. It did in the spring of 2011, And so they immediately diverted the creek into the temporary diversion channel. And as soon as it reached high flow, it tore out the liner and the creek disappeared again. After about a year, they built a new line diversion channel, which you can see here. And here's a photo of Clancy Creek there. Here we can see an initial new failure in the pit wall in 2009. Tension cracks here. Here's a massive crack between the Clancy Creek Valley and the pit wall out in the forest. Here in July 2013, another big thunderstorm washed the liner out of the creek, tore out the liner in the new creek diversion. All the water disappeared into the ground again. Okay. And here's that impermeable buttress that they constructed between the pit wall and Clancy Creek, with a DEQ inspector walking along it on, I believe it was July 30th, 2013. And he noted in an inspection report, this wall could fail in the next several years. Well, maybe he should have been standing there. Here he is a couple of days later flagging off the public access road around there because a large portion of the pit wall collapsed. Here you can see trees falling into the pit, dust rising, massive landslide here with a muddy pit lake. Okay, on the opposite side of the pit, meanwhile, other things were going on. I've heard it said that it might be related to the tailings pond, which is located right over here. Again, an unlined tailings pond, a large lake not far away from the pit. So they had massive stability problems. You can see all these slump features here cutting right through these buildings. And very little sign of pit benches left at all at this point. And this is in 2014. So massive instability on that wall of the pit. Looking at Clancy Creek again, within a couple of months of the failure, they had put in this diversion pipeline that intercepts the creek and bypasses the mine. In 2018, DEQ hired Golden Associates to come in, fly a heavy lift drone into the pit and sample the pit lake at multiple depths. The lake had just turned over, as indicated by a perfectly even specific conductance profile shown there. Here's the probe on the bottom of the cord attached to the drone. Our water quality results shown there indicate, like, great. Drinking water, aquatic life standards, meets everything. So that was the good news. People kept asking, why is the pit lake so blue? Well, I don't know, maybe a little bit of cloudy sediment in it or something, but the water is good. Back to corporate history. So again, permitted, 1986, 1998, Pegasus Gold files for bankruptcy, as represented by the Titanic there. I think you could call that event the iceberg, and it's taken 25 years to sink since then. So out of the bankruptcy came Apollo Gold. They were purchased for a mere $5 million for all 3 Apollo Gold properties in 2002, and still they were short on money. An article in the magazine Resource Investor in 2005 referred to them as appalling gold and an obvious train wreck. Things weren't going well. Elkhorn invested in them in 2006. They rebuilt their haul ramp. Ultimately, they were absorbed by Eastern Resources, and from 2012 to present, Eastern Resources has been trying to get investors to open this mine again. Reclamation bond history. So quickly, from 1 million up to 15 million by the time of Pegasus' bankruptcy. And since then, we've mostly gained liens on land. They had like 90 properties that they owned outside of the mine area that we had liens on because they couldn't post cash or surety. So then going up to 2009, they replaced the surety bond with cash somehow. I'm not sure how. But I think the surety just wanted out. We then estimated the bond needed to be $34 million after a lot of time had passed, and they couldn't post it. So in 2018, we suspended their permit. In 2019 or 2020, we ordered them to amend their plan to include a permanent Clancy Creek diversion because it needed to be done. Okay, 2021, we notified them that we were going to forfeit their bond because they still hadn't posted bond. We entered into an administrative order, and they made 2 payments, and then they missed their 3rd payment, and then they immediately declared bankruptcy. The process took most of a year. As part of the Chapter 11 reorganization plan, they had to resume the payment plan. They made their 1st payment, missed their 2nd one. We have forfeited their bond, and there's a final bankruptcy hearing coming up, so I don't know the final answer. They reclaimed 5 acres in 2021, which is really all they've done aside from clearing the forest off the Clancy Creek area in preparation of building a diversion through there. Oops. We have this successor operator law that says a company could step in and post the remaining amount of bond. Since we forfeited part of the bond, if they post the bond to make it whole, a new company could come in and take the operating permit over. There are negotiations going on with an interested party. I was on site with them a month ago. We don't know if they will choose to acquire the project or not. So now what? We've got less than $24 million. Our engineers say total reclamation could cost $41 million. So we may get a successor operator who posts the remaining amount. We may not, and if so, we will make the best with the money we have and hopefully find additional financing somewhere to complete reclamation. Questions?
Who calculates these bonds?
Well, engineers. And you know what? The reclamation cost is going up all the time. So the longer the project sits dormant, the more expensive it is to close.
Well, thanks, William, for triggering my memory. I had done, before I retired, I'd done some rough calculations of how much material they might have to move to make that pit stable. It was a big number.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
With that water quality being as good as it appears to be, is the long-term plan to put a pit lake there that might have some aquatic value?
Well,
What are you going to do with that big hole?
you know, the pit lake is putting itself there. The last EIS said it would take 200 years to reach equilibrium, and it'll still be like 50 feet below, you know, the adjacent stream level. So you could stock it with fish, except there's nothing for them to eat. If only there was some nutrients in there, but there's no nitrate or anything. So there's, you know, nothing to start up a food chain necessarily at this time. The lake's chemistry would certainly support that if you could establish, you know, starting out with algae and microbes and whatnot and working your way up to fish. It's certainly of good quality. But no, there's no plan for that. First of all, we've got to deal with the tailings impoundment.
As long as you're hearing from all the old guys, thanks for triggering my memories and making me appreciate retirement all the more.
You're welcome.
All right, any last questions for Wayne? Great, thank you, Wayne.